So in this week's video, we're going to talk about legal and illegal fat burner use in female bikini athletes or animal generally. Now you go in a gym and it's really hard to find someone who doesn't take any kind of supplement, either over the counter or something they have got wherever they manage to get it from. And maybe you can open up about how prevalent is fat burner use. Is it something that's really out there and everyone kind of goes with it, or is it not really as hard? And how can I even describe? To me, it feels like a lot of people are more obsessed about what they can take rather than what they should be doing. Is this the case?
I see that in the competitive demographic very much. I think there's some sort of appeal to the more I'm taking, the better everything will be. But I've seen the other extreme is people trying to take over the counter things, expecting the same results as the more, questionable things, but for the same purposes, but a different, more of a less. They don't want to take as much, but they are thinking that the natural route will get them the same results. So I'm seeing kind of both, but the prevalence of fat burners, it's probably around here one of the most common abused things for sure in the aesthetic driven world.
What would you say is the most used thing that's widespread all over the place in legal side and illegal side? What are the most common things? What are the names that people might come across, and maybe when they are in gym and they hear someone talking about some stuff and they could like, oh yes, they're talking about fat burners, and what's happening there?
I would say in the competitive world, the illegal or the banned side, clenbuterol is probably the most common. It's common in bikini athletes, it's common in strippers, it's common in porn stars, it's common everywhere, and anyone looking to have a certain leanness. And it's a banned substance, so I'm not aware of it being really illegal anywhere. I do know that there is I do know there's some prescription reasons for it in certain medical conditions, and also in some veterinarian use, but it's a banned substance. On the natural side or the legal side, around here, people are getting duped into buying the supplements that have some sort of like pepper extract or some sort of thing that's really doing nothing. Really around here, in Canada, there are a few things that are legal, but the dose is very important to be effective, and it's not legal to buy the effective dose. So there has to be a little bit of clever manipulating being done. So I guess it kind of depends on where we're looking. And then, of course, certain things are legal here and illegal somewhere else. Like in Canada, ephedrine, which is an effective fat burner, dosed appropriately, is legal, but illegal in the United States, where they have yohimbine legal and we have it as illegal. So sin is almost geographical here. So I guess it kind of depends on where you're living.
Yeah, it's interesting because
I think we should do some future videos and get a little bit into these specific compounds a little more so people have an understanding. But because there's a lot of them and they're very specific and very niche, but yet they get abused all the time.
So what about other things? So you talked about ephedrine, clenbuterol, you talked some magical potions and whatnot. Is there anything else that anyone could hear about and perceive as this could improve their fat burning abilities?
Oh yeah, there's thyroid drugs, DNP, growth hormone. Some people will even tell you that certain steroids are fat burning. Anavar, oxandrolone specifically gets that rep from time to time. The mechanisms aren't really known, and to me, not really documented that it's actually burning adipose tissue, but it does seem to lend some sort of support to that in some ways. You also secure people using metformin. The list of things that could be improving body composition is pretty extensive. The list of what people are using, God knows, like people come up with some crazy ideas, but I would say those are the most common. Clenbuterol, ephedrine, yohimbine, growth hormone, thyroid drugs. Those are probably the more common ones that anyone in the gym world has probably heard of all of those for sure. But even in Gen Pop, I think some of them are actually so mainstream to a point that they're even aware of those there.
So what, in your perspective, differentiates legal versus illegal? Is it just laws of the country? Because in UK, a lot of people don't know yohimbine is illegal, but a lot of people have access to it. They can't access it in like a shop or whatever, but there are people who can get hold of it who, let's say, fly to Canada and bring it back. Or thyroid, stuff like that. You can fly to Turkey, load your suitcase up and come back. But in UK, you won't be able to do that. So what differentiates these things from legal to illegal? Is it just laws of the country, or is it something else that people should be looking at? Like growth hormone as well. A lot of people perceive growth hormone as something that's going to make you huge. In my personal views, it's just very expensive fat burner. So what about these things that makes them different from legal to illegal?
I think the legalities of them is literally geographical. I'm not aware of any other reason, but I have clients international, and I know for sure in Turkey, things they can go over the counter and get them, where here you would need a prescription. And you see it everywhere. So I think it's geographical mostly. And I don't know why that would be, to be honest. I have no idea the thought process behind that, but it's definitely geographical.
So would you say that illegal things are more dangerous than legal ones? Maybe that's where the secret lies.
I don't think so. Yes, sometimes for sure, but in the case of, as a blanket statement, no, because there's nothing really overly dangerous. It depends on what you're determined to be dangerous. You're not going to be life-threatening taking yohimbine, but it's illegal here. Now, if you have anxiety or you're an anxious person, yohimbine can elevate that to some degree, but there's not like an acute life-threatening issue for some of these, yet they're illegal here or illegal there. A lot of them, like clenbuterol, it is been used and still is at therapeutic dosages. So it's obviously not theoretically dangerous at a therapeutic dose, but if you take enough or abuse it enough, you could. Now that one happens to be banned. Ephedrine is sort of the same thing. It's legal here, and I believe it's illegal in the States. The dosage that you can buy here, there's not really much risk of any sort of danger. Now, to get it to be an effective fat burner, you have to start playing with the doses a little bit. So it seems to be, and I don't know. I almost wonder if it's more of a money-driven reason why things are illegal or not. I don't think it's a safety profile overall, because some of them are equally dangerous or safe, and they're legal here and illegal there.
So what do you think is the main things that has brought these things into market? Is it like a social pressure of where you need to be a certain body fat percentage to be classed lean, when we might not agree that it's actually healthy or doable or sustainable in long run? Or is it something else that these fat burners will make you feel great? You know, your quality of life improves and those kind of things. What do you think is the main things that drives these things into someone else's shelf to be used?
I think for the purpose of fat burning, I think the main push there is the desire to look a certain way. Like there's certain ones that they do not make you feel better. Like DNP will make you feel fucking like death. But I think that the main drive in the aesthetic world is it's an aesthetic thing. It's a vanity thing. It's a level of leanness that they want to achieve, and these compounds, in theory, will be beneficial. There are some compounds that could be therapeutically dosed that could therefore not have anything to do with the aesthetics, but offer some sort of benefit in terms of a health marker of some sort. But when we're talking about the fitness industry and females using fat burners, it's a desired look. I think almost 100% of the time. I don't see any other reason why they would use a fat burner than to reduce fat.
So when you go into this, it's is there a safe way of doing it? How long can a woman use these fat burners? And what are the health markers you would tell someone to check before you even consider going that route, or even going in calorie deficit?
I think a lot of things come into play there. Health markers, I think, should be checked all the time. And then depending on the compound of choice, there'll be a health marker that would be more specific to be looked at. Like if you're going to be using thyroid medication for your fat burning, goals, then thyroid markers would need to be monitored. But in general, more the stimulant side, like Clenbuterol and things that are stimulants, you're going to see increases of heart rate or resting heart rate, blood pressure, things like that. So it sort of depends on exactly which one we're using and which health marker would be relevant. And what was your other part of your question there?
To me, I'm looking into understanding what's what is needed and what they need to be aware of, what can change. So let's say somebody is using legal fat burners, someone is using illegal fat burners. Do they both need to start at the same stage? And if they are going through this fat burning phase, whatever, what is the difference between someone who is using legal versus illegal fat burners? Even though we kind of already discussed that it might be that you're using something that's legal in your country, and in other country it's completely illegal. So it kind of loses completely the sense of even differentiate these things. But
Yeah.
in the aspect of this video where we talk about that legal will be majority of things that you get over the counter, and illegal will be something that professional athletes use, where they go all in on all the compounds you listed, clenbuterols, thyroids, growth hormones, and whatever else they throw in there. So what would be the health markers you would look into to begin with? Hey, everything needs to be in check. Well, and then what health markers do usually change at the end for someone who is using illegal substances would probably be a bigger concerns than someone who is using, I don't know, some kind of mushroom or whatever that supplement shop owner told them to use.
I think the legal, it's hard for me to say because it depends on where you live, but here, the legal ones, none of them, the over-the-counter ones, none of them are directly going to attribute to fat burning, other than potentially ephedrine. But again, that has to be dosed appropriately, and it has a synergistic effect alongside caffeine and aspirin and stuff like that. So it's kind of needs a bit of an adjustment. All the other over-the-counter things could lend to fat loss because they may be improving a deficit of something. Like maybe you have a vitamin or mineral deficiency, and that corrects that. So it's hard to say, but I would be hard pressed to tell females, we don't want to just throw everything at you all at once. Like there really should be a plan here, and you're systematically determining what needs to happen and when, and making adjustments based on what's going on. Like if the goal is fat loss, energy balance is key. Without an energy deficit, there is no fat loss. Like end of story. The fat burners, depends which one you do, some of them increase your metabolic rate. By definition, that's almost like taking away a little bit of calories. You create a deficit. But I would say you're better off to make your energy deficit in play with your programming, and then start to look at what is now the best tool for fat loss. What is it that exactly do I need? They don't all operate the same way. And to just throw them all in the mix You have no idea what's doing what. You have no idea when your blood pressure shoots up, or when your thyroid, markers are off the charts, or when your heart's beating out of your chest. It becomes very difficult to understand who's causing what. I think it's a much better approach to have a periodized plan, pencil that whole thing in, try to leave it, and try to make real world adjustments based on what's going on. And women don't want to be living on these things all year round. It's not necessary. I mean, it's a tool. If the goal is fat loss, you use your tools, accomplish the goal, and then you shouldn't be trying to use fat loss anymore. It might be time to focus on something else, like building muscle. You don't really want to try to focus on both of those at the same time. So there really has to be, in my opinion, a plan put in place. And then you start to look at, okay, this would be a good option for this block of my plan. It's not just, I want to lose fat, let me have all the fat burners. I think that's a terrible approach.
So it's not a smart idea to throw in some thyroid and clenbuterol every 4 weeks, every month.
No, in my opinion, it's a terrible idea to just keep throwing things at it. I think a lot of that comes from these myths where Clenbuterol, for example, was always thought that, well, you need to cycle it on and off because your body's going to adapt and it's just no longer going to work. Well, that's just not the case. You just might not be noticing the symptoms anymore because your body's adapted to some of these things. So they're constantly increasing dosages or whatever they're doing. I definitely don't operate that way, and I don't think anyone should. That is a very template way of doing things. That's a way a coach could have 100 or 200 people, because they literally can just type it out 6 months ahead of time and give it for everybody. But you need to be looking at things regularly and adjusting accordingly if you want to be successful with your goals, but also maintain longevity, sustainability. This needs to be monitored, I think, all the time. Not just, oh, here's your 12-week plan. Every 2 weeks, increase the dose, increase the dose, increase the dose. What if you don't need the dose? What if your rate of fat loss is already going perfectly well? Why do you need to take more?
This brings me to the question about how long is safe to be on something and then come off, and also how much of efficiency of legal or illegal fat burners depends on athletes' experience in training, their muscle mass, and all those kind of things.
I think there's no guarantee that any duration is safe or unsafe with any drug. I personally would always sort of try to get away with the least for the longest amount of time. That's sort of how I like to do it. But how it affects people, it could vary. I have one female athlete that about a decade ago used 1 round of Clenbuterol, and she has permanently suffered some minor heart damages from it. And she only did it 1 time, and it's a decade ago, and it has not revived. I've had other people seemingly abuse Clenbuterol, and when they stop, everything seems to go back to normal. But I wouldn't want to play that Russian roulette. I think that it's better to understand the compounds of choice, understand the risk reward, be comfortable with the risk reward, and then utilize it for its purpose. And again, if we're designing a block of time, I would use it for that time that we allotted it for. If we have a 12 or 16 or 20-week time frame where fat loss is the goal, and we've decided on these compounds, then aside from some sort of outlying emergency, which I've never seen, I would expect you to continue to use it. And then all the while, we monitor our health markers, which we should be doing anyway. And if something is becoming a concern, we have a discussion. I think that's how you should handle everything when it comes to this stuff.
So this brings me to more important stuff that I think needs to be kind of highlighted, that all the things you listed, branded under fat burners, they work completely different. So which one of them increasing your metabolic rate and which one of them do completely different things? Could you expand about what actually Clenbuterol does? What thyroid drugs will do to you? What growth hormone will do to you? What eucombine will do to you? Just a general, like a highlight about all of them. And then I think in future we could really dig deep into every single one of them separately.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, some of them have similarities, but in general, all things labeled fat burners are not all working the same way. Obviously, with the thyroid drugs, we are taking something to increase your metabolism hormonally. We have other things like clenbuterol that's changing the vasoconstriction of the body, and it is improving or increasing your metabolic rate. We have things like yohimbine that is actually beneficial at more of mobilizing body fat, not burning body fat. So it's actually not even a fat burner. It's just classified as one. It actually mobilizes fat. Clenbuterol also seems to prioritize fatty acids as a preferred energy source over glycogen. So they do have different things. And I think it's important that we give them justice and sort of break them down in more detail with videos, because they do get complicated. You have to consider half-lives, and you have to consider all these things that determine your dose, your theoretical durations, etc. But they absolutely do look differently. In the aesthetic eyes, they all look the same. Well, that's a fat burner, but on paper and in medical terms, they look very different because they are. And then obviously, depending on which one you're using, if you're using thyroid, it would be a good idea to be monitoring thyroid markers. Stimulants like clenbuterol.
How often would you check your thyroid markers when you are on thyroid?
I would have a check prior, so we know what your baseline thyroid values were at. I would use the thyroid drug. There's no immediate concern with a healthy individual with the implementation of a thyroid drug, but it will suppress the endogenous thyroid loop. So I would implement the thyroid drug for the program duration of time, and I wouldn't be checking the thyroid throughout, because there's just no need. You're exogenously providing the dose that we suggest. That's what's going to be there. But then at the completion of this, the female or the individual should know that they are now suppressed. They're going to go through a rebound, in an unavoidable one, but all will be fine if you are patient and we allow the understanding of the timeline of the half-life of the drug to run its course. Thyroid's usually pretty resilient. So I would have a pre-values checked. I wouldn't worry about checking during, because we already know it's affecting it. And then after, I would check to see how suppressed, like I would probably check after to see how suppressed you were. It's not necessary, but it's information. And then I would give it probably 5-6 weeks later and check again and see if we're back online. But you'll have a very good idea just on your symptoms. If your caloric intake, which should be, relatively well monitored, is indicating anything, you'll have an idea. If this was causing me weight gain and now it's not, things are kind of coming back online. But monitoring thyroid values constantly with thyroid drugs, I don't think is necessary. I think it's just a good idea to know prior, and how long did it take to get back to that original value.
Are there any values you would be concerned about when somebody uses clenbuterol?
I wouldn't like to see the blood pressure get too high. I think high blood pressure is not good. Typically, females, that's not a concern. There are some hypermuscular females that are using other things where blood pressure is already on the fence. Clenbuterol can bump you up a few more points, and that might be a problem. But if we're talking about the bikini-looking females, they almost certainly don't have high blood pressure, and clenbuterol is almost certainly not going to give them high blood pressure, but it's going to give an elevation. I would probably mostly be watching that, with almost certainly not coming to an issue. But it would be one of the main markers I look for. Resting heart rate is a good marker, and it'll show you that things are happening, but it's not going to put you into a danger zone by any means. That's what I mean. Like, there's no real immediate danger, other than there is the outlier, or abuse of a drug. But if you're taking something like clenbuterol at an effective dose, it's not like you go from perfect blood pressure to, oh shit, this is very, very bad. I mean, these drugs are very well designed and studied and understood. It's just a matter of us applying them in a manner that's not drug abuse.
So is there some things that people can predict change in when they use yohimbine?
Yohimbine actually will cause water retention, and that's something that is important for females because sometimes they're in a fat loss phase, and most females, unfortunately, are relying on scale weight to be their main metric of tracking. And if you are in a deficit, and I put yohimbine in you, and your scale weight doesn't move, you think that you're not losing body fat. And if your deficit is in place and you're actually following it, that's not a possibility. But it is very possible the scale weight didn't budge, and yohimbine can cause water retention. So that's important to know. Yohimbine can also, it's actually been known to increase libido. I've actually heard stories. Actually, I think it's Lyle that was telling the story. There's been cases of like females orgasming during certain exercises on yohimbine because of the stimulation they're getting from whatever movement they're doing. So they would probably notice change in libido. And there's that anxiety thing that we spoke briefly about. If you have anxiety, yohimbine can heighten it to a point of problem. But that's a very individual thing. If you have anxiety or you're prone to anxiety, I probably wouldn't be looking at yohimbine. But it is an option. And then I guess the other thing would just be for yohimbine to be effective. Again, we'll do these compounds justice in their own videos, but for yohimbine to be effective, you need to be in a fasted state. Any presence of insulin sort of negates the benefits of the mobilization of fatty acids from yohimbine, and yohimbine can make you feel nauseous. So oftentimes, if you need to be taking it about an hour or so before you start cardio, and you could feel pretty nauseous. And I've seen it more so than not. No one's ever puked, but majority have felt a bit nauseous. And the minute they're done their cardio and they have a bit of something to eat, it's almost immediately gone. But as for a blood marker on yohimbine, I don't think you're going to see much of anything. I think the biggest thing to know from yohimbine is how you feel and that potential scale blip from water retention.
Yeah, it's interesting that to me it sounds that they could be used all at once because they do different things, but we know that's not the case. So what about ephedrine and things like that? What role does that play? Where you would put it in if you did, let's say, live in Canada and it's easily available because it's legal? So where would you put it in, and what health markers would you look into changing there that need to be carefully monitored so something doesn't go sideways?
Ephedrine, the common ECA stack, the ephedrine caffeine stack, it's actually quite comparable. It seems in real life practice as well, but also on paper, it's actually quite comparable to the metabolic boost that clenbuterol offers. Clenbuterol and ephedrine, like none of these fat burners are amazing. They're giving you a slight edge or a slight boost of something. I think clenbuterol is more magical in its anabolic effects, especially in females. But from its fat burning properties, the EC stack and clenbuterol are quite similar. And you're going to see, an approximate anywhere from 5 to, 10. I've seen 10, but could be even slightly more. But say approximately a 10% increase in metabolic rate from an EC stack or Clen or something like that, which is not nothing. But again, because the body's adaptive and we are in a fat loss phase, I would much rather see maintenance calories is 1,800. Let's implement a 10% deficit via caloric restriction or energy output, whatever we choose, or both, and ride that 10%. Let's just say that we chose a 10% deficit via caloric restriction, and it brought calories down to a point where compliance is being threatened. At that point, if we needed another adjustment, maybe now an introduction of something like ephedrine would work, because I'll get another theoretical 10% deficit without moving calories any further. Where if I throw everything at you all at once, you're still going to adapt. So if I can throw everything at you all at once, you get the fat loss off right away, goals accomplished, that's fine. But if you've got a long way to go and you throw all your tools out at once, you start to run out of runway. Like when you start to get to the adaptation point where you can't really take calories any lower, you've already been using ephedrine, you can add a second dose, you can even add up to a third dose, and still relatively no health concerns for healthy people. But at some point, you just have nothing left to do. So I think it's much better off to strategically put them in when they seem like the right time and use them for what they're worth. The other problem with increasing dosages of ephedrine, you need that synergistic effect with caffeine. You're going to ride the half-life out of these drugs. So with ephedrine, you're going to be doing something like every 4 to 6 hours or so. You could, in theory, now you're going to get the decline. You could now go to your second dose. But if you start putting a third dose in, and now it's like late afternoon or early evening, now you have to worry about the effects of caffeine and how does that going to affect your sleep. And there's just so many moving parts to these equations that I think the template of let's just throw all these fat drugs, it's going to work. You have no idea what's going on. You have no idea what problems you may or may not see, and you have no idea what to adjust. It's easier because you got a template and it said, here you go. But I think it's a terrible approach. And I think that's why you see so many people see extreme rebounds and extreme, bouts of depression, weight gain, all these things, because they're just lost in this whole web of a fucking mess, really.
So to me, it sounds like it's the quicker you want to achieve these results, the faster you're going to reach, let's call it systemic fatigue, where your body is just doing everything to not do what you are pushing it to do anymore. So how long, well, let me try to rephrase this, because we know a lot of people who want to stay lean all year round. Mm-hmm. And me and it's impossible. Like you're just playing, you're just being dumb. It's just no other way of saying this. So
it's a level of lean. It depends on the level of leanness they're trying to hold. You can't hold, if they're talking about like competitors and their stage leanness, you can't hold that all year round. What a lot of people aren't realizing is that these people are hormonally being supported exogenously. So they can maintain lower body fat levels because they have drugs in all the time. There's never a break. There's a break of certain drugs, but certain ones are always there. They're either down at a therapeutic dose or they're peaked out. If you don't have exogenous hormonal support, a certain level of body fat decline is going to cause you a lot of problems, your body a lot of problems, and it just won't be sustainable.
So especially in women, you see they want these shredded abs and veins popping out on stomach and shoulders and whatnot. And you clearly look at them and you are not healthy anymore. It's not good.
Right. There's probably all kinds of underlying things that could determine them unhealthy to break to a psychological point. Like they could be so hyper obsessed about everything. That's not necessarily a healthy place to be. Like you want to have a healthy relationship with food if you're looking to do this long term. If you just push that body hard, you'll get away with it. The body's very resilient. If you've never pushed it before and you push it once, you get fantastic results and think, oh shit, this is the way to do it. But every time you push it, it's going to respond a little differently and not quite the same or not quite as effectively as the last time. And it's just going to continue because you can only hammer the red line on your car so many times until something goes wrong. Overall, when you're speaking of people that want to just look good and feel good all the time, they have to have a realistic expectation of how lean or how good they can look via comparison to their health markers. But then, how can you do that if it's a crazy aggressive diet or a crazy amount of drugs? Like you're just not going to sustain it. Something's going to break on you. A part of your equipment's going to go down.
What do you think is the good amount of time to have a break from these fat burning drugs and all these kind of things that give you enough time to fully recover so you can do another fat loss phase, so to speak. So instead of trying to stay lean all year round and sooner or later paying for it, what would you say is a good kind of middle road of, hey, lose some body fat, get back in some maintenance, maybe build some muscle again, then lose body fat again, and so on and so forth. Because the more muscle you have, it kind of gets a bit easier to lose body fat because you have more room to play with. So what would you say would be on average a time scale from somebody who's got competitively lean to recover fully and then be able to do another fat loss phase?
I think on average, if we were going to speak to individuals that are going to be going into a fat loss phase or something, there's going to be like a 16, 20 week-ish time frame where somewhere in that fourth month or so, things are going to start to break down, or fatigue, or just basically show signs of wear. Could be joint tendon health issues, could be health markers, could just be overall systemic fatigue,
Sex drive.
stress level. Yeah, sex drive. It can be so many things. So typically, I would use your fat loss drug for your fat loss phase, and that should be relatively calculated. You can't expect to live in a deficit all year round just because you have a lot of body fat to lose. Because if you do that, you're going to run so many adaptations into your body that you're going to get to the point where things just aren't doing anything for you anymore, and you can't really move. You can't eat less. I have literally worked with a female for many, many years who, through the medical system, was put on a program where they got 3 shakes a day. And the shakes, all 3, added to less than 900 calories. All 3. This lady was 380 pounds. She did that for 1 year, not a break. Nobody told her any of this stuff. And the first couple months, weight flew off her, of course, from like 380 or whatever to 360 in a couple months. And wouldn't you know that at 360, it just stopped. It stopped cold at some point. And all that happened is her thyroid crapped out, all kinds of health markers crapped out. And that was it. She was stuck. I spent probably 2 years with her eating like 4,000 calories. And she started bringing her weight down another 20, another 30, because now her body was getting a chance to kind of do what it wanted. So you can't, if you have a lot of body fat to lose, unfortunately, you just have to take your time. You have to still be realistic with what you're doing. I would say the competitive people that have just reached stage or whatever, you shouldn't need to be losing fat now. You just stepped off stage. If you stepped on stage and you weren't lean enough, you shouldn't have stepped on stage. So let's go with the premise that you were lean enough. You don't need fat loss. So you have no need for a fat burner. And to use a fat burner to maintain your leanness, to me, is just borderline drug abuse. You should have other things in play, like proper calories, proper training, proper rest, to maintain a relatively similar physique, but some body fat has to come back on just for regular hormonal function. Each drug has, or compound has, different pharmacokinetics, so different half-lives, different things you need to consider. So how long do you need to take a break from this drug versus that drug? It depends. I think it's a much better approach to have blocks of periodization of your long-term goals where you implement, okay, this block is dedicated to muscle building. I don't need a fat burner when I'm muscle building. This block is dedicated to fat loss. Okay, bring in my fat loss, weapons or whatever they are. I think when it comes to the females wanting to maintain a level of leanness all year round, I think it's the only way to do that successfully long-term is you have to have the lifestyle habits in place. You have to have a certain amount of muscle, a certain amount of strength training in play, and you have to understand energy balance. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're manipulating, is energy balance. Some people are just using drugs or supplements to help do that, but you're way better off to just have an understanding of where it needs to be first. And if you have 2,000 calories as maintenance, then 1,800 is a theoretical deficit. You can't tell me you can't sustain 1,800 calories for long term. Like, some girls struggle eating that much to begin with. They're notoriously under eating from day one. So they think that to get leaner, they got to eat even less than they're already eating. And then to maintain, they have to stay eating that low amount of calories. And their body is just going to show them over some time that, no, you made a mistake. And now I'm going to give you this problem or that problem or that problem to deal with. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, a big takeaway would probably be that there is an obsession about looking in a certain way, and to look in a certain way, you definitely need to take XYZ, detox teas, this kind of fat burner, and this kind of this kind of that. Whereas it would be probably healthier for women specifically to put some time and thought into how do I maintain my health for as long as I can, because you can't do any of these things without being healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be open-minded to the idea that, hey, at some point of the year, I will look amazing, but I need to step back from being obsessed with how I look and take care of my health and maybe chill out a little bit and be a bit softer and whatnot for good up to 20 weeks, like you said, to make sure that everything is completely fine and healthy. And then you can push hard again. Let's say just adjust the seasons of the year. Hey, spring is coming, summer is coming, let's hit it hard, let's go really work out harder, maybe throw in some supplements, whatever your country allows you to use, and go with that flow would be much healthier than being obsessed with your favorite Instagram model who is posting same exact photos from 2002 that have never changed anything, and you think, oh, this is how all women look all year round, when they don't. They really don't.
They definitely don't. And I think another thing that's very important for females to understand, if they don't already understand it, but then also just be aware of, like, that extreme level of leanness, the majority of the population doesn't think that's attractive anyway. That's a very niche area. A female can very easily walk around in a very healthy, lean state all year round without any trouble. If they set the foundation from the beginning and build that empire, they'll be fine. And they can sustain that level of leanness with fairly decent amount of calories. And the more muscle mass they have, the more calories they'll get. But like the high teens, low 2,000 calories per day, many women can maintain a very, very lean physique all year round. It's that level of stage leanness that you just can't keep all year round. It's drug induced, more drug induced than people, I think, even realize. And you just can't keep on those drugs that long, because that would be the end.
And especially a lot of people never realize the side effects because women don't openly talk about it. Hey, if you are that lean, all you want to do is just fight over some nonsense and you have no sex drive, zero completely. You'll have no relationship if you look like bikini model. It's just not going to happen. And many other things that affect them mentally much harsher than they would like to admit.
Yeah, I do think it's a very tough industry for females, because literally everything's focused and catered at them. There's so much social pressure for them to look a certain way, but the reality is that they're almost biologically hardwired to not lose that much body fat. Like their body's just not going to do it unless you really push the envelope. And if you do, you have to do it very strategically and for very short durations, because it's very hard on the system. If you try to spend a couple years living in that level of leanness, those will be your couple of years. And from that point on, you'll never even look lean again. And then you will suffer all kinds of, like I see it all the time. At one point, national and even some pro level people that did that, they basically abused their bodies, and now they can't get it back. And all you see is throwback pictures. And in real life, they look like you wouldn't even recognize them. They're emotionally and mentally very, very damaged. And their approach still, I see it all the time. It's still extreme. Like I will see some high level competitors that are now not eating hardly anything, always taking all their carbs out and doing HIIT training all the time, boot camps, F45s, doing all these things, high impact, high intensity, no carbs, because they can't lose weight, and they're still not losing weight, and all they're doing is digging the hole deeper, and they're really stuck in this physiological rut that they don't know how to get out of. And it's sometimes sad to see, because they usually don't get out of it. And I think it all comes down from that obsessive, borderline abusive behavior to the body. Like it has a breaking point, and you can find it if you look for it.
Yeah. So highlight of this is don't get obsessed with bikini bodies at competitive level, because it's probably not something you need to aspire, and things that come with it are oftentimes not talked about. But if you go that route, be very specific at what you do, when you do, and how long you do it, instead of having this fake perceptions that this is something you can maintain for the rest of your life. It's just physiologically impossible.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point. Like it's a good move if you're not competitive but want to look the part. I think you can do that. I think you have to, like you said, you have to be realistic that you won't look the stage level, all year round. But I think it's a good strategy, like how you said, like, because most people are living within season, so it's a good time to spend more time. We're coming into the summer seasons. Let's focus on the fat loss. We're coming out of the summer seasons. Let's focus on the muscle gaining. I'm never focusing on fat gaining, but weight and fat are not the same. So that has to be understood. And then you can kind of cycle these phases back and forth. And at the end of the day, you could be in a deficit for a few months of a year, and that's it. And I think that's a good place for women to be. I think they should spend more time in at least a maintenance level caloric intake, if not a surplus level caloric intake, then they should be in a deficit. I think that deficit should be the smallest duration of the year.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate your time. And in next videos, we're going to go properly deep. I would like you to dissect all these things, how they work, what they actually do inside the body, what things they affect, what's actually happening. Maybe people are interested about, hey, if they are not exactly the same, what do they actually do to my body? And what do I need to kind of make sure that I have in place before even reaching for this thing? Because there might be something that I take and buy, but my body is not even ready to kind of utilize that. So if you're open for that for next video, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
Awesome. I'll speak to you soon then.
All right. Thank you.